The slap echoed through the Cheongdam luxury mall like a gunshot. Sure. Unmistakable. Final. Zariah Cole's vision blurred as her cheek exploded in burning pain, her body spinning sideways into the glass jewelry display. The sound of shattering crystal mixed with gasps as her purse tumbled from her fingers, contents scattering across the polished marble floor. Her elbow cracked against the metal frame, a sharp sting adding to the shock coursing through her body. For 3 seconds the entire 5th floor froze. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Phones lifted instinctively, already recording. She tasted blood and disbelief in equal measure as she looked up from the floor, her torn coat sleeve exposing the diamond bracelet she never wore in public, at the man standing over her with disgust carved into his features. Derek Holt. Her ex-fiancé. The man who'd stolen her savings, abandoned her pregnant, and left her to sleep in her car 4 years ago. "Don't you ever ignore me," Derek snarled loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you're too good to speak now? Still pretending you're better than you are?" He had no idea who she was anymore. No idea that the broken woman he remembered, the one who'd begged him not to leave, who'd cried alone in hospital hallways, who'd lost their baby from stress and malnutrition, was gone. No idea about the life she'd built in Seoul, the empire she'd helped create, or the wedding ring hidden beneath her black leather gloves. And Derek definitely had no idea about the man whose name was now legally attached to hers. The man whose security team was moving toward them right now. The man whose phone was vibrating in her coat pocket at this exact moment. Kang Juniseo, her husband. Seoul's most dangerous underground king. As Zariah's trembling fingers pulled out her phone and Juniseo's deadly calm voice asked, "Are you hurt?" she watched realization start to creep across Derek's face like frost spreading across glass. He just slapped the wrong woman. And in approximately 10 minutes, when Juniseo's motorcade pulled into this mall's underground garage, Derek Holt was going to learn a lesson about consequences that would dismantle his entire existence. But he still didn't know it yet. Right now, in this frozen moment, he still thought she was nothing. That was about to change forever. Before we dive deeper into this story of survival, love, and redemption, do me a favor. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to me. Now let's get to the story. That morning had started like any other in the Cole Kong household. Zariah stood in their massive walk-in closet, the one that still felt surreal even after a year of marriage, selecting a simple black coat for her shopping trip. Despite the luxury surrounding her, designer labels hanging in perfect rows like an expensive army, she still gravitated toward understated elegance. Old habits from harder times died slowly. "You're doing it again," Juniseo said from the doorway, already dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her first month's rent in that terrible studio apartment she'd lived in before Korea. He was devastating to look at, his dark hair styled back perfectly, his presence commanding even in the intimacy of their bedroom. Even now, after 12 months of marriage, he still took her breath away. Doing what? She turned, fastening simple pearl earrings, the ones he'd given her on their 3rd date. "Choosing the least expensive things in your closet." He crossed to her, sliding his hands around her waist with the ease of familiar affection. "You're married to one of the wealthiest men in Seoul. Stop shopping in your wardrobe like you're on a budget." She laughed, the sound genuine and light. "I like simple things. They suit me. I like spoiling you." He kissed her neck, his voice dropping. "Humor me. You humor me by loving me exactly as I am." She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. Scars and all. His expression softened in that way it only did for her, the dangerous edges of Kang Jun-il melting into the man who whispered poetry in Korean against her skin at 3 in the morning. Always. Then his face shifted, becoming more serious, more protective. "You're going to Cheongdam today?" "Just some Christmas shopping. I won't be long." She knew what was coming before he even said it. "Take Minho and Taeyoung with you." His voice left no room for negotiation. "Baby, I don't need bodyguards to buy presents." His jaw tightened, that dangerous stillness settling over him. "Zariah, you know what I am. What I do. The enemies that creates. You don't leave this penthouse without security. Ever. Non-negotiable." The steel in his voice was absolute. This wasn't her husband asking. This was Kang Juniseo, underground king of Seoul, speaking. The man whose word was law in circles most people didn't even know existed. She cupped his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Okay. I'll take them." The rigidity left his shoulders immediately. "Thank you." He checked his watch, solid platinum, deceptively simple but worth more than a luxury car. "I have a meeting in Gangnam." I'll be home by 7. We have dinner reservations at 8. Where? That dangerous smile again, the one that promised trouble in the best way. It's a surprise. Wear the red dress. The one I can't stop thinking about removing. Heat flooded her cheeks even as she smiled. You're impossible. Only for you. One more kiss, deep and thorough and possessive, before he left her breathless in their closet. 2 hours later, Zaraya walked through the Cheongdam luxury mall with Minho and Taeyong maintaining their usual discreet distance, close enough to intervene but far enough to give her the illusion of privacy. The mall was a cathedral of wealth, all marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, every storefront a monument to excess. Christmas decorations sparkled everywhere, gold and silver and elegant, expensive and breathtaking. She just exited a boutique, bags in hand containing gifts for Junisio's mother and sister, when she saw him across the atrium. Marcus, no, Derek. Derek Holt. Her ex-fiancé. The man who'd left her homeless and pregnant 4 years ago. The man who'd stolen her last $3,000 and disappeared while she was grieving their lost baby. Her feet stopped moving. Her heart stopped beating. For one horrible moment, she was 26 again, broken and alone, sleeping in her car because she couldn't afford rent. Then Derek's eyes found hers across the crowded mall. Recognition flickered. Then contempt. He started walking toward her, and Zaraya knew with terrible certainty that her past was about to collide with her present in the most devastating way possible. She had no idea that in 60 seconds her entire world would shatter. Again. But this time she wouldn't be alone when it happened. Derek's sneer was exactly as she remembered. That particular curl of his lip that said he was about to say something cruel and call it honesty. Zaraya? His voice carried across the polished marble, drawing attention. Zaraya Cole? Damn, I didn't think you'd still be in the country. Thought you would have crawled back to whatever hole you came from. Minho stepped forward instinctively, but Zaraya raised her hand slightly, stopping him. Her mouth had gone dry. Her carefully constructed new life felt suddenly fragile, like glass about to crack. Hello, Derek. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked her up and down with open assessment, taking in her designer coat, the shopping bags from expensive boutiques, the subtle makeup and styled hair. She could see him calculating, trying to reconcile this version of her with the desperate woman he'd left behind. Well, he said, walking closer with that familiar swagger she'd once mistaken for confidence. Looks like you landed on your feet. Let me guess, rich boyfriend? Sugar daddy situation? He laughed, cruel and sharp. Always knew you'd figure out how to use what you had. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut, to reduce, to remind her of who she used to be in his eyes. Worthless. Opportunistic. Less than. But they also dragged her back. Back 4 years to a different version of herself. A version she'd worked desperately hard to bury. 4 years earlier, Chicago. Zaraya had loved Derek Holt the way drowning people love air. Desperately. Completely. Without reservation or self-preservation. They'd met at a coffee shop where she worked her second job, pulling double shifts to cover rent on the studio apartment they shared. He was charming then, full of big dreams and bigger promises. He was going to start a business, make millions, take care of her forever. All he needed was time to figure things out. So Zaraya gave him time. She worked her administrative job from 8 to 5, then rushed to the coffee shop for the evening shift, then came home to cook dinner and listen to Derek explain why this week's job interview didn't pan out. Why his business plan needed more development. Why success was just around the corner if she could just be patient. You don't believe in me, he'd say whenever she gently suggested he take any job even temporarily. If you really loved me, you'd support my vision. So she did. She worked 60-hour weeks while he networked and developed contacts. She paid rent, utilities, groceries. She ignored the charge notifications from her credit cards, the ones Derek had asked to borrow for business expenses. It's an investment in our future, he'd assured her, kissing her forehead. When I make it big, I'll pay you back 1,000 times over. She believed him because the alternative, that she was being used, was too painful to consider. Then she got pregnant. She'd been terrified to tell him, knowing their financial situation was precarious at best, catastrophic at worst. But part of her, the naive part that still believed in fairy tales, thought maybe this would change things. Maybe becoming a father would motivate him. Maybe they could be a family. You're what? Derek's face had gone white, then red, then twisted with anger she'd never seen before. Are you kidding me right now? I know it's not ideal timing, but... Not ideal? Zaraya, I can barely take care of myself. You think I want a kid right now? He paced their tiny apartment like a caged animal. This is exactly what women like you do. Trap a man with a baby. The accusation had stolen her breath. Women like me? Derek, we've been together for 3 years. I would never. You expect me to believe this was an accident? That you weren't hoping to lock me down? His laugh was bitter, hateful. I should have known better. Should have been more careful. She'd cried that night, alone in their bed while Derek slept on the couch. Cried for the relationship she thought they had, for the partnership that was apparently a delusion, for the baby growing inside her that was already unwanted by its father. But she stayed. Because where else would she go? The next 3 months were held disguised as normal life. Derek became distant, hostile, treating her pregnancy like a personal betrayal. He stopped pretending to look for work. Started staying out late. Came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. Zariah worked until her feet swelled and her back screamed. She skipped meals to save money, telling herself the baby was getting nutrients even if she wasn't. The stress mounted like water behind a dam, pressure building with nowhere to go. Then one morning she woke up to an empty apartment and an emptier bank account. Derek was gone. His clothes, his laptop, his phone charger, everything. The only thing he left behind was a note on the kitchen counter. I can't do this. Don't try to find me. She'd stood there in her worn pajamas, 3 months pregnant and completely alone, staring at her phone screen showing a bank balance of $17.32. He'd taken everything. Her savings, the money from her last paycheck, even the emergency fund she'd hidden in a separate account. $3,000 gone. Her entire safety net vanished with the man she'd sacrificed everything for. The eviction notice came 2 weeks later. Zariah had been rationing food, eating once a day, trying to make every dollar count. She'd applied for assistance, for help, for anything, but bureaucracy moved slowly and her landlord didn't. She packed what she could fit in her 10-year-old Honda Civic and left the rest behind. For 2 months that car was her home. She parked in 24-hour store lots, used gym memberships for showers, and tried desperately to keep her administrative job while hiding the fact that she was homeless. The hunger was constant, a gnawing companion that never left. She grew dizzy at work, exhausted beyond measure. Her baby bump was barely visible because there was nothing to feed it. Then came the cramps. She was in the parking lot of a grocery store, debating whether to buy food or put gas in her car, when the first wave of pain hit. Sure. Unmistakable. Wrong. By the time she made it to the charity hospital, she was bleeding through her jeans. A kind nurse held her hand while a tired doctor delivered the news she already knew in her bones. Her baby was gone. Miscarriage, likely caused by malnutrition and severe stress. I'm sorry, the doctor said, but Zariah barely heard him through the roaring in her ears. She'd lost everything. Her money, her home, her partner, and now her baby. She was completely, utterly alone in a world that didn't care if she lived or died. That night, still cramping, still bleeding, she sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and made a choice. She could give up, let the grief and despair swallow her whole. Or she could survive. Survival meant leaving. Getting as far from Chicago, from Derek, from the graveyard of her old life as possible. She researched teaching programs abroad, positions that provided housing and didn't require much upfront capital. South Korea kept appearing in her searches. Distance. Structure. A chance to disappear and rebuild. She applied to every program she could find. Used the hospital's free Wi-Fi to update her resume, to write cover letters, to imagine a future that didn't include sleeping in her car. 3 weeks later she got an offer. Teaching English in Seoul. Housing provided. Flight included. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Zariah Cole stood in O'Hare International Airport 4 weeks after that, holding a one-way ticket and a single suitcase containing everything she owned. She had $300 to her name, a teaching contract, and absolutely nothing left to lose. As the plane lifted off, she made herself 2 promises. She would never beg anyone for anything ever again. And she would never, ever allow herself to be powerless. She didn't know then that keeping those promises would lead her to a penthouse in Gangnam, to a man who ruled Seoul's underworld, to a life beyond anything she'd imagined. She only knew that Derek Holt had taken everything from her except her will to survive. And that, it turned out, was the one thing that mattered. Back in the Cheongdam luxury mall present day. So who is he? Derek's voice snapped her back to the present. The guy paying for all this? He gestured at her bags, her coat, her entire existence with dismissive contempt. Zariah looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no residual love. Just a distant recognition of someone who used to have power over her and didn't anymore. That's none of your business, Derek. Still playing hard to get? He stepped closer, invading her space. You always did think you were better than you were. Gold digger who acts like a princess. Minho moved then, positioning himself between them. Sir, step back. Derek's eyes widened at the sight of the bodyguard, then narrowed with understanding and disgust. Wow. You really did find some rich idiot to take care of you. Does he know what you are? What you come from? He knows everything. Zariah's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Now please leave me alone. She turned to walk away, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to protect the life she'd built from contamination by her past. That's when Derek grabbed her arm and spun her around. That's when his hand connected with her face. That's when her entire world exploded in pain and shattered glass and the terrible realization that you can never truly outrun who you used to be. The slap echoed through the mall like thunder. And somewhere in her coat pocket, her phone began to ring. 3 years earlier Zariah's apartment in Mapogu was tiny, barely 300 square feet of efficiency living, but it was hers. Clean walls, a narrow bed, a kitchenette she could touch both sides of with her arms spread. After sleeping in her car, it felt like a palace. Teaching English at the language academy was structured, predictable, safe. She taught businessmen in the mornings, university students in the afternoons, and children in the evenings. The work was exhausting but honest. Every paycheck went into her account and stayed there. No one could take it. No one could leave her with nothing. Slowly, painfully, like a broken bone healing crooked, Zariah began to remember what it felt like to breathe without fear. She made friends with other foreign teachers. Learned basic Korean. Explored the city on weekends, marveling at how far she'd come from that parking lot in Chicago. But she kept people at arm's length. Especially men. The scar tissue around her heart was thick, protective, necessary for survival. That worked fine until the night her co-teacher dragged her to a charity fundraiser for international education programs. You need to network, Melissa insisted, straightening Zariah's borrowed dress. Make connections. Plus there'll be free food and wine. When's the last time you had free wine? Zariah couldn't argue with that logic. The gala was held in a gleaming hotel ballroom in Gangnam, all crystal chandeliers and designer gowns and wealth that made her modest teacher's salary feel microscopic. She felt out of place immediately, clutching a glass of wine and trying to look like she belonged. That's when she saw him. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, alone despite the crowd, watching the room with the quiet attention of someone who missed nothing. Tall, impeccably dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with dark hair styled back and features that were striking rather than conventionally handsome. But it was his stillness that caught her attention. Everyone else was performing, networking, peacocking. He was simply observing. Their eyes met across the ballroom. He didn't smile, didn't look away. Just held her gaze with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Then he started walking toward her, cutting through the crowd with quiet purpose, and Zariah's first instinct was to run. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, he said in perfect English, his voice low and surprisingly warm. She laughed despite herself. That obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. He extended his hand. Kongjunaseo. Zariah Cole. His handshake was firm, controlled, and brief. Respectful. You're not a fan of charity galas? I'm a fan of the cause. Less enthusiastic about the performance. He gestured vaguely at the room. Everyone here is pretending to care while really just expanding their networks. Cynical. Accurate. That hint of a smile again. You're a teacher? How did you? Your name tag says Seoul Global Academy. He nodded at the small badge on her dress. Also, you have the look of someone who works with children. Patient. Observant. She should have felt analyzed, but somehow it felt like being seen. And what do you do, Kongjunaseo? Investments. Real estate. Various business interests. The answer was smooth, practiced, revealing nothing. Boring mostly. They talked for an hour. Not about work or networking or anything transactional. About books, about Seoul versus Chicago, about the strange experience of building a life in a country where you'd always be foreign. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and asked questions like he actually cared about the answers. When he asked for her number, Zariah hesitated. The walls around her heart were thick for a reason. Just dinner, he said quietly. No expectations. No pressure. Just conversation with someone who doesn't bore you. She gave him her number. Told herself it meant nothing. Their first date was at a small restaurant in Itaewon, Nothing flashy or expensive. He asked about her life, her teaching, her plans. She asked about his work, his family, his view of soul. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, like they'd known each other longer than a week. He didn't ask about her past. Didn't pry. Didn't treat her like a mystery to be solved. The second date was a walk along the Cheonggyecheon stream. The third was a cooking class that ended with them laughing over burnt kimchi pancakes. The fourth was a jazz bar in Hongdae where they talked until 3 in the morning. Somewhere between date 5 and date 10, Zaraya realized she was falling for him. And it terrified her. "I need to be honest with you," she said one night over coffee in his car. They'd just left a movie and he'd been about to drive her home when she stopped him. "I'm not good at this. Relationships. Trust. I have a lot of baggage." Junio turned in his seat to face her fully. "We all have history, Zaraya. Scars don't make you less worthy of care. Mine run deep. Then we'll take it slowly." His hand covered hers gently. "No rushing. No pressure. Just us figuring this out together." The kindness in his voice almost broke her. It was on their 15th date, 3 months into whatever they were building, that she started noticing the details. The way people deferred to him in restaurants. The expensive watch he wore casually. The penthouse address she glimpsed on his mail. The driver who sometimes picked him up. "You're wealthy," she said one evening, not accusatory, just observing. He didn't deny it. "Does that matter?" "I don't know." Honesty felt safer than pretense. "I've never dated someone with money before. I've never dated someone who didn't care about money before." He smiled slightly. "Refreshing, actually. You like me for who I am, not what I have." But wealth, she would learn, was only the surface. The truth came 6 months into their relationship. She'd been at his penthouse for dinner when a call came through. Juniseo's entire demeanor changed, his face becoming a mask of cold authority as he spoke rapid Korean into his phone. When he hung up, he looked at her for a long moment. "There's something you need to know about me," he said quietly. "About what I really do." He told her everything. Not the sanitized investor story but the truth. The underground networks. The controlled territories. The violence he authorized but didn't commit. The empire built on power and fear and strategic dominance. He was Seoul's silent king, the man other dangerous men answered to. Zaraya listened, her heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to run. This was dangerous. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. "I won't apologize for what I am," Juniseo said when he finished. "This is my world. I was born into it and I've made it mine. But I will never lie to you about it." "You kill people?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I make decisions that sometimes result in death." His honesty was brutal, unflinching. "I don't enjoy it. But I don't hide from it either." She should have left. Should have walked out and never looked back. But something in his eyes stopped her. Honesty. Vulnerability beneath the armor. Trust that she wouldn't use his truth against him. "I need time," she said finally, "to think about this. About whether I can live in your world. Take all the time you need." He didn't touch her, didn't try to convince her. Just gave her space to decide. She avoided him for 2 weeks. Turned over every angle, every consequence, every fear. Juniseo was dangerous, powerful, involved in things that could destroy her. But he was also honest, protective, the first man in years who made her feel safe instead of vulnerable. Finally she called him. "I need to tell you something. About my past." They met at his penthouse and Zaraya told him everything. Derek. The abuse. The pregnancy. The abandonment. Living in her car. The miscarriage. Every humiliating, devastating detail she'd hidden from the world. When she finished, Juneo was silent for a long time. His hands were clenched on his knees, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. Chicago maybe." "It doesn't matter. It matters." The fury in his eyes was terrifying and somehow comforting. "He left you homeless and pregnant. He caused you to lose your child. He deserves." "No." Zaraya touched his face gently. "I didn't tell you for revenge. I told you because if we're going to do this, you need to know who I was. What I survived. Why I'm so careful with trust." His expression softened, the rage transforming into something deeper. Respect. Even. Anyone who survives what you survived isn't broken. They're dangerous in the best way. Dangerous. Strong. Resilient. Unbreakable. He pulled her close, his embrace fierce and protective. "You didn't need me to save you, Zaraya. You saved yourself. That's power most people never find." She cried then for the first time since arriving in Seoul. Cried for the woman she'd been, for the baby she'd lost, for the pain she'd carried alone. And Juniseo held her through it all, steady and unmovable. He proposed 6 months later in the same restaurant where they'd had their first date. Simple, private, perfect. The ring was elegant, understated, exactly her style. "I'm not asking you to join my world," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to build one with me. Partnership, not possession. Equals, not protector and protected." She said yes without hesitation. They married in a private ceremony with only his closest family and her few friends present. No spectacle, no performance. Just vows spoken with intention and witnessed by people who mattered. She kept her maiden name professionally, a small assertion of independence he not only accepted but respected. Their first year of marriage was learning to merge lives, to balance his dangerous world with her need for normalcy. He never hid his work from her, but he also never forced her into it. She built her own life, her own identity, separate from being the boss's wife. But she was his wife. And in Juniseo's world, that meant something. Protection, yes. But also respect. Fear even. She was untouchable not because she was weak but because she belonged to someone powerful. Until the day her past walked back into her present in a luxury mall. Until Derek Holt made the fatal mistake of thinking she was still the powerless woman he'd left behind. Until a slap echoed through marble halls and shattered the careful separation between her two worlds. Now, with her phone ringing in her pocket and Juniseo's name flashing on the screen, those worlds were about to collide. And Derek had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Present-day Cheongdam Luxury Mall. Zariah's phone vibrated insistently in her coat pocket as mall security finally pushed through the crowd. Her cheek throbbed where Derek's hand had connected, the metallic taste of blood sharp on her tongue. Around her, dozens of phones were still raised, recording, capturing her humiliation for posterity. Derek stood over her, chest heaving, face flushed with righteous anger like he'd just done something justified. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," he spat. Minho had him by the collar within seconds, slamming him against the nearest wall with controlled violence. Taeyoung helped Zariah to her feet, his face professionally blank but his hands gentle as he steadied her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was quiet, urgent. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls. All from Juniseo. The current call was still ringing. She answered with trembling fingers. "Hello. Are you hurt?" His voice was terrifyingly calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms. In the background, she could hear car doors slamming, engines starting, organized chaos. "I'm fine," she lied, touching her swelling cheek. "Just a misunderstanding." "Zariah." His voice dropped lower, infinitely patient, absolutely unyielding. "Are you hurt?" A tear slid down her face, stinging the cut on her lip. "Yes." Silence. Then, so quietly it was almost a whisper, "Who touched you?" She looked at Derek, still struggling against Minho's grip, still arrogant, still clueless about what was coming. "My ex Derek Holt. The one I told you about." Another pause, longer this time. When Juniseo spoke again, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I'm 10 minutes away. Don't let him leave." "Juniseo." 10 minutes, Zariah. "I promise." The line went dead. Mall security had finally arrived, 2 guards trying to sort out the situation while maintaining the mall's elegant atmosphere. Derek had shrugged off Minho with exaggerated outrage, smoothing his expensive jacket. "This is assault," Derek announced loudly, pointing at Minho. "I want him arrested. That woman's bodyguard attacked me for no reason." "You slapped her," Minho said flatly, his English accented but clear. "She ignored me. Disrespected me." Derek turned to the security guards like they'd obviously take his side. "I was just trying to talk to my ex-girlfriend, and her hired muscle attacked me." One of the security guards looked at Zariah's face, at the reddening handprint and split lip, and his expression hardened. "Sir, we have everything on camera. You assaulted this woman in our mall." "Assault? I barely touched her." Derek laughed, that same dismissive sound she remembered from 1,000 arguments. "She's being dramatic. Probably trying to get money out of me." The security guard's radio crackled. He listened for a moment, his face going pale. He said something in rapid Korean to his colleague, who also paled. Both men straightened, their casual authority transforming into rigid formality. "Sir," the first guard said to Derek, his tone completely different now. "You need to come with us. Immediately." "I'm not going anywhere until—" "Now, sir." The guard's hand went to Derek's arm, not quite forcing but absolutely insistent. Something in the atmosphere had changed. Zoraya felt it before she understood it. The other shoppers were backing away, creating space. Store employees were emerging from their boutiques, watching with wide eyes. Someone in the crowd whispered in Korean and several people gasped. Then she heard it. The sound of expensive shoes on marble, multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. The crowd parted like water. Kang Juneo walked into the atrium with 6 men flanking him in precise formation. He was still in his business suit from the morning meeting, but something about him had changed. The veneer of civilized investor had been stripped away, revealing the predator beneath. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his movements deliberate and unhurried, radiating an authority that needed no announcement. The entire 5th floor went silent. Mall employees bowed instinctively. Security guards stood at attention. Even Derek, clueless as he was, felt the shift in power and stopped talking mid-sentence. But Junisio only saw Zoraya. He crossed to her in 4 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. His thumb brushed the corner of her split lip, his jaw tightening as he catalogued the damage. When he spoke, his voice was so soft only she could hear. Did he do this? She nodded once and something terrible flickered behind his eyes. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and possessive, then turned to face Derek. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You must be Derek Holt, Junisio said in perfect English, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. I've heard so much about you. Derek's bravado faltered slightly. Who the hell are you? Security office, Junisio said without looking away from Derek. Now. It wasn't a request. 2 of his men moved immediately, gesturing for Derek and the security guards to follow. The head of mall security appeared from somewhere, bowing deeply to Junisio and speaking rapid, deferential Korean. Derek's face was reddening with confused anger. You can't just order me around. I don't care who you think you are. I think, Junio interrupted, his voice still terrifyingly calm, that you should walk to that office under your own power. Because if my men have to carry you, I won't ask them to be gentle. Something in his tone finally penetrated Derek's arrogance. He looked at the 6 men all standing with military precision, all watching him with dead eyes, and some survival instinct kicked in. This is insane, Derek muttered, but he started walking. The security office was spacious and private, with monitors showing multiple camera angles of the mall. Junhyo had dismissed the security staff with a single word, leaving only his own men positioned at the door. Derek stood in the center of the room, trying to look defiant and failing. Zoraya sat in a chair by the wall, Minho hovering protectively nearby. Junio stood between them, still perfectly calm, studying Derek the way a scientist might study an interesting insect. So, Derek said, trying to reclaim some confidence. You're the sugar daddy. The rich guy keeping Zoraya in designer clothes. He sneered. Does she tell you about her past? About how she's just trailer trash playing dress up? Junio moved so fast Derek didn't have time to react. One moment he was standing 5 feet away, the next his hand was around Derek's throat, slamming him against the wall with controlled violence. Not choking, just holding, demonstrating absolute power. Let me clarify something, Junio said softly, his face inches from Derek's. Zoraya is not my girlfriend. She's not someone I'm keeping. She is my wife. Derek's eyes went wide. Wife. My wife. Junisio's grip tightened slightly. The woman you abandoned when she needed you most. The woman you stole from. The woman whose child you helped kill through your cruelty and neglect. Each word was measured, precise, damning. And today in a public mall, you slapped my wife in the face. The color drained from Derek's face as realization finally crashed over him. I didn't know. You didn't care. Junisio released him, stepping back with that same eerie calm. You saw a woman you thought was powerless and you decided to remind her of it. To humiliate her. To hurt her. Derek slumped against the wall, his bravado completely shattered. Look man, I'm sorry. I didn't realize she was married to someone like you. If I'd known. If you'd known I was powerful, you would have treated her with respect. Junisio's smile was terrible to see. But because you thought she was still nothing, you felt entitled to assault her. That tells me everything I need to know about you. He turned to one of his men, speaking in Korean. The man nodded and pulled out his phone, making a call. Derek was shaking now, finally understanding that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. What are you going to do? Junio looked at him for a long moment. I'm going to teach you about consequences. It started with a phone call to Derek's employer. An anonymous tip about financial irregularities in his accounts, backed by mysteriously obtained evidence of expense report fraud. Then his bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Nothing illegal, just bureaucratic tangles that would take months to resolve. Credit cards declined. Assets temporarily inaccessible. The mall footage went viral within an hour. Someone had already uploaded it with the caption, "Man assaults woman in Cheongdam Mall." Derek's face was perfectly visible, along with his entitled rage and Zariah's humiliation. By evening, Derek's fiancée had seen the footage. And the carefully compiled information about his past that arrived in her inbox. His abandonment of Zariah. The stolen money. The pregnancy. Everything. She ended their engagement in a scathing social media post that went viral in its own right. Derek's apartment lease was mysteriously not renewed. His car loan called in for immediate payment. Employment opportunities that had seemed promising suddenly evaporated. None of it was violent. None of it was illegal. It was just the systematic dismantling of a life through leverage, influence, and strategic pressure. Junseok orchestrated it all with quiet efficiency, watching the dominoes fall with professional detachment. But then he turned to Zariah. "Do you want me to continue?" She looked at Derek, crumpled in the security office chair, crying now, his entire world collapsing in real time. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger. Just a distant recognition of justice. "I don't want him dead," she said quietly. "I don't even want him destroyed. I just want accountability. He stole from you. Abandoned you. His actions led to your miscarriage." Junseok's voice was careful, controlled. "I could make him disappear. No one would question it." "I know." She met his eyes. "But that would make me like him. Someone who solves problems through cruelty. I'm not that person anymore." Junseok studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we stop here. He loses his job, his fiancée, his reputation. The money he stole will be returned with interest. He faces legal consequences for the assault today. But nothing more." "Nothing more," she agreed. He turned to Derek one final time. "You're going to leave Seoul tonight. You're going to return every cent you stole from Zariah with interest. You're going to accept the consequences of your assault charge. And you're never going to contact her again." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because if you do, if you ever even think her name too loudly, I will find out. And next time I won't ask my wife what she wants. I'll simply act. Do you understand?" Derek nodded frantically, snot and tears running down his face. "Good." Junseok extended his hand to Zariah. "Let's go home." 1 week later, Gangnam Penthouse. Zariah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom, watching Seoul wake up beneath a winter sunrise. The city glittered with morning light, vast and indifferent and beautiful. Behind her, she could hear Junseok moving through the apartment, the quiet domestic sounds of coffee brewing and news playing softly. Her phone sat on the nightstand, silent for the first time in 7 days. The media storm had been immediate and relentless. The mall footage had exploded across Korean and international social media, racking up millions of views within 48 hours. Local news picked it up, then national outlets, then international entertainment sites hungry for drama. American woman assaulted in Seoul luxury mall. Ex-boyfriend attacks woman, doesn't know she married Korean businessman. Public assault caught on camera sparks outrage. The comment sections were overwhelmingly supportive. Women sharing their own stories of abusive exes. Men condemning Derek's actions. Koreans and foreigners alike expressing outrage at public violence. Some recognized Junseok in the footage, though most media outlets carefully avoided identifying him directly, his influence extending even into journalism. Interview requests flooded her email. Women's advocacy groups reached out. Strangers sent messages of support and solidarity. The world, it seemed, had collectively decided Derek Holt was a villain and Zariah was a survivor worth championing. But what surprised her most was how calm she felt about all of it. A week ago, she would have been mortified by such public exposure. The old Zariah, the one who'd hidden her homelessness and suffered in silence, would have been destroyed by having her trauma displayed for millions to witness. But that woman was gone. And the woman standing at this window, wearing her husband's shirt and drinking expensive coffee in a penthouse she'd helped make a home, felt only a strange sense of peace. "You're thinking too loud," Junseok said from the doorway, 2 coffee mugs in his hands. He'd showered and dressed for the day, looking effortlessly powerful even in casual slacks and a fitted shirt. She accepted the coffee with a small smile. "Just processing. Regrets." He slid his arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest as they both looked out at the city. No, she meant it. I thought I would. Thought I'd be embarrassed or angry or something. But I just feel free. His arms tightened around her. You're free. He can't hurt you anymore. He never could. The realization settled over her like sunlight. Not really. I gave him that power by being afraid of him, by letting my past define me. But standing there in that mall, even after he hit me, I wasn't that scared girl anymore. I was just angry that he thought he could still treat me that way. Junio turned her to face him, his hands framing her face gently. You've always been strong, Zariah. You just needed to remember it. She kissed him softly, gratefully, then pulled back with a decisive breath. I want to do something with the money. His eyebrow raised slightly. The money Derek returned? 3 days after the mall incident, exactly $3,000 had been deposited into Zariah's account, along with an additional $2,000 in interest and damages. Junisio's people had been thorough. Derek had sold his watch, borrowed from family, and scraped together every cent to meet the deadline. I don't want it for myself, Zariah said. It feels tainted. But I keep thinking about all the women who are where I was 4 years ago. Homeless, broke, terrified, convinced they're worthless because someone told them they were. Junisio's expression shifted, interest and pride mixing in his eyes. What are you thinking? A foundation. A non-profit. The idea had been forming all week, crystallizing with each supportive message she received. For women recovering from financial and emotional abuse. Not just a shelter but a real program. Housing, therapy, legal support, job training. Everything I needed and couldn't find. She pulled out her phone, showing him the notes she'd been compiling. Pages of research, organizational structures, mission statements drafted and redrafted. I want to call it the Rise Project, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Because that's what we do. We rise from the ashes of what tried to destroy us. Junio read through her notes in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, there was something fierce and tender in his eyes. How much do you need? I'm not asking you to fund it, she said quickly. I know you'd write a check for whatever I asked, but that's not the point. I want to build this myself properly. Start small, prove the concept, then scale up. His smile was slow, proud, devastating. You don't need me to save you. You never did. No, she agreed. But I need you to support me. To understand that this matters to me. I do. He pulled her close, speaking against her hair. And for the record, I'm going to fund it anyway. Not because you need saving, but because you've built something worth investing in. Consider it my first major donation to the Rise Project. She started to protest, but he silenced her with a kiss. Partnership, remember? He murmured. You build it. I support it. We both win. 2 weeks later. The foundation paperwork was progressing faster than Zariah had imagined possible, helped along by Junisio's legal team and her own relentless focus. She'd found a small office space in Idiwan, affordable but professional, where she could start planning in earnest. Her teaching position at the academy had been understanding when she requested a leave of absence. With her newfound public profile, some of her students' parents had expressed concerns, but others had been incredibly supportive. Either way, Zariah had saved enough and had enough backing now to take 6 months to get the Rise Project off the ground. She was reviewing rental applications for potential program housing when her email pinged with a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, I'm sorry. Zariah's finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. She opened it. Zariah. I know I have no right to contact you. I know you probably hate me and you should. What I did to you both 4 years ago and at the mall is unforgivable. I've spent the last 2 weeks losing everything. My job, my fiancé, my reputation, my savings. At first I was angry. I blamed you, blamed your husband, blamed everyone but myself. But last night I was sitting in my hotel room with nothing left, and I finally understood. This is what I did to you. This emptiness, this fear, this feeling of having nothing and being nothing. Except you didn't deserve it. You were trying to help me, trying to love me, and I destroyed you for it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I did. I see who you were and who you became despite me. And I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm leaving Korea tomorrow. You'll never hear from me again. Derek. Zariah read it twice, waiting for the surge of emotion. Anger, satisfaction, grief, something. Instead, she felt only a distant acknowledgement, like reading about a stranger's problems in the newspaper. She closed the email without responding, then moved it to trash. She didn't empty the trash folder, didn't permanently delete it, but she didn't need to read it again either. It simply existed, acknowledged and released. Junhyo found her an hour later, still working on foundation documents, the email already forgotten. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down takeout from her favorite restaurant. "Perfect," she said and meant it. Derek sent an apology email. His expression darkened slightly. "Do I need to?" "No." She took his hand, squeezing gently. "It doesn't matter. He's part of a past that doesn't control me anymore." Junhyo studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You're remarkable, you know that? I'm a survivor." She pulled him down for a kiss. "There's a difference." "Not to me." His voice was soft, reverent. "To me you're both." 1 month later. The Rise Project's website went live on a Tuesday morning. Simple, professional, clear in its mission. Resources for women in crisis. Information about programs still in development. A donation button that had already received contributions from anonymous supporters, many of whom Zaraya suspected were connected to Junesio's network. By evening, they'd received 15 applications from women seeking help. By the end of the week, 42. The need was staggering, overwhelming, and exactly what Zaraya had expected. She hired her first employee, a Korean-American social worker named Grace who'd survived her own abusive relationship. Together, they began the slow, careful work of building something real. Something that mattered. Junesio watched it all with quiet pride, offering resources when needed but never taking over, never making it his project instead of hers. He attended planning meetings when invited, donated generously but privately, and celebrated every small victory like it was his own. Their marriage deepened in ways Zaraya hadn't expected. She wasn't the protected wife of a powerful man. She was a partner building her own empire, different from his but equally valid. He respected her work, her autonomy, her strength. And she respected his honesty, his protection, his unwavering support. One night, lying in bed after a particularly long day of foundation work, Junio pulled her close. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. "Derek." Zaraya considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But not the way I used to. I don't hate him anymore. I don't fear him. He's just a man who made terrible choices and is living with the consequences. That's not my burden to carry." "He destroyed parts of you." "No." She turned to face him in the darkness. "He tried to. But I rebuilt those parts stronger. The woman I am now, the foundation I'm building, the life we have together, none of that would exist if I hadn't survived him. I don't thank him for the pain, but I recognize that the pain shaped me." Junesio kissed her forehead, her temple, her lips. "I love you, Zaraya Cole. I love you, Kang Junesio." She smiled against his mouth. "Even though you're still the most dangerous man I know." "Especially because of that," he corrected with dark humor. She laughed, the sound free and genuine, and thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago. Broken, homeless, convinced her life was over. That woman would never have believed this future was possible. Would never have imagined rising from the ashes of her destroyed life to build something beautiful and purposeful and strong. But she had risen. And she was still rising. Derek Holt had tried to destroy her, but he'd only refined her. Turned her into something harder to break, more determined to survive, committed to helping others find the same strength. That, Zaraya thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was the best revenge of all. Not destruction but transformation. Not bitterness but purpose. She'd won. Not because Derek had lost but because she'd refused to stay down. And tomorrow she'd wake up and help another woman do the same. 6 months later, the Rise Project opening day. The ribbon stretched across the entrance of the renovated building in Itaewon, red and brilliant against the clean white facade. Zaraya stood before it, scissors in hand, surrounded by supporters, donors, media, and most importantly, the first 12 women who would call this place home while they rebuilt their lives. The building wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was solid, safe, and filled with possibility. 3 floors containing individual studio apartments, communal spaces, therapy rooms, a job training center, and administrative offices. Every detail had been chosen with intention, designed to provide dignity rather than charity, empowerment rather than rescue. Grace stood beside her, beaming with pride. Junio was in the back of the small crowd, deliberately staying out of the spotlight but present nonetheless, his quiet support as constant as gravity. Several local news cameras were rolling. A small but meaningful group had gathered to witness this moment. Zaraya cleared her throat, her hands surprisingly steady as she began to speak. 4 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I was homeless, pregnant, and convinced my life was over. The man I'd loved had stolen everything from me and disappeared. I lost my apartment, my savings, and eventually, my baby. I slept in my car and ate once a day when I was lucky. I thought I was nothing. Worthless. Broken beyond repair. She paused, meeting the eyes of the women who would be her first residents. She saw her own past reflected in their faces. Fear, hope, exhaustion, determination. But I was wrong. I wasn't broken. I was being forged into something stronger. Every night I survived in that car, every meal I skipped to save money, every moment I chose to keep breathing instead of giving up. Those weren't signs of weakness. They were acts of resistance. Of power. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. The Rise Project exists because I know what it's like to fall and have no one catch you. I know what it's like to be told you're nothing by someone who was supposed to love you. I know the specific terror of having nowhere safe to sleep and no one safe to turn to. She smiled, genuine and fierce. But I also know what it's like to rise. To rebuild. To discover that survival itself is a form of victory. She gestured to the building behind her. This isn't a shelter. This is a launch pad. For the next 6 months, 12 women will live here rent-free while they heal, learn, and prepare for their next chapter. They'll have access to therapy, legal support, job training, and financial literacy programs. They'll have safety, community, and most importantly, the time and space to remember who they are beyond their trauma. Zariah looked directly at the cameras now, thinking of all the women watching who might need to hear this. To anyone out there who's where I was 4 years ago, sleeping in your car, hiding bruises, convinced you deserve this, terrified there's no way out, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not worthless. You are surviving impossible circumstances with limited resources, and that takes more strength than most people will ever understand. This place exists for you. And if you can't get here, I hope you'll find something like it. Because you deserve to rise. She cut the ribbon. Applause erupted, genuine and warm. Several of the resident women were crying. Grace hugged her tightly. Reporters shouted questions. But Zariah's eyes found Junisio's across the crowd, and his small, proud smile meant more than all the applause in the world. That evening, the official opening had been exhausting but exhilarating. After the ceremony, Zariah had spent hours with the residents, helping them settle into their new apartments, listening to their stories, seeing her own past reflected and refracted through their experiences. There was Minji, 28, who'd fled an abusive marriage with her 5-year-old daughter and nothing else. There was Sarah, a fellow American who'd been trafficked and was trying to rebuild an identity separate from her trauma. There was Hannah, 19 and pregnant, abandoned by her boyfriend and disowned by her family. Each woman carried wounds that Zariah recognized intimately. Each one reminded her why this work mattered, why her own survival had purpose beyond just existing. By the time she returned to the penthouse, she was emotionally drained but deeply fulfilled. Junio was waiting on the balcony, 2 glasses of wine already poured, the city lights of Seoul spreading below them like an ocean of stars. He'd changed out of his formal suit into comfortable clothes, looking relaxed and approachable in ways he rarely allowed the rest of the world to see. Come here, he said softly, extending his hand. Zariah kicked off her heels and joined him, accepting the wine and leaning against the railing beside him. For a long moment, they just stood there in comfortable silence, watching Seoul breathe and pulse and live. You were magnificent today, Junicio said finally. That speech. The way you connected with those women. I've never been prouder of you. I almost cried 3 times, she admitted with a small laugh. You should have. It would have been earned. He turned to face her fully. Do you know what I saw today when I watched you cut that ribbon? She shook her head. I saw the woman I fell in love with, fully realized. Not the careful teacher who was afraid to take up space. Not the survivor still processing her trauma. But the complete version of Zariah Cole, strong, compassionate, purposeful, unafraid. His hand cupped her cheek gently. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and transformed it into something that will save lives. That's not just survival. That's alchemy. Tears pricked her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. His certainty was absolute. It would have taken longer, been harder, but you would have found a way. You always do. That's who you are. She kissed him then, deep and grateful and full of love that still sometimes overwhelmed her with its steadiness, its safety, its absolute reliability. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Derek hadn't hit me in that mall? She asked when they pulled apart. If our 2 worlds had stayed separate? Junicio considered this. I think you would have built the Rise project eventually, with or without that catalyst. The need was always there. Your compassion was always there. That incident just accelerated the timeline. Maybe. She sipped her wine thinking. I got an email from him last week. Derek. Junisio's expression darkened immediately. What did he want? Nothing. Just an update, I guess. He's back in Chicago working as a delivery driver living with his brother. He's in therapy, attending support groups for abusive behavior. She shrugged. He said he thinks about what he did to me every day and it haunts him. Good, Junisio said without sympathy. I didn't respond. I don't think I ever will. Zoraya looked out at the city. He's not part of my story anymore. Not really. He's just the obstacle I overcame, the darkness that made me appreciate the light. But he doesn't define me. He never really did. No, Junicio agreed. You defined yourself. Through every choice to survive, every decision to rise, every moment you refused to let his cruelty determine your worth. 1 year later, the Rise project had expanded to 2 buildings and served 48 women in its first year. Zoraya had been featured in Korean and international media, had spoken at conferences, had become an unexpected voice for domestic violence survivors worldwide. But the moments that mattered most weren't the public ones. They were the quiet victories. Minji landing a job at a marketing firm and moving into her own apartment with her daughter. Sarah graduating from a coding bootcamp and getting hired at a tech company. Hannah giving birth to a healthy baby boy and choosing to keep him, raising him in safety and love. Each woman who walked out of the Rise project stronger than she'd entered was a testament to the truth Zoraya had learned through her own survival. You could be broken and still become whole. You could be destroyed and still rebuild. You could lose everything and still find yourself. On the anniversary of the foundation's opening, Zoraya stood on the same balcony where she'd stood a year before, Junio beside her as always, and thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago. That woman, sleeping in her car, grieving her lost baby, convinced she was worthless. Zoraya wished she could go back and tell her everything would be okay. That the pain had purpose. That survival was just the beginning. But she couldn't. So instead, she helped other women find that truth themselves. What are you thinking? Junio asked, his arm around her waist. That Derek was wrong. She smiled up at him. He thought I was nothing because I was poor, desperate, powerless. He never saw my strength because he was too busy looking down on me. He never recognized my resilience because he mistook survival for weakness. His loss, Junio said simply. Completely. Zoraya leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the safety of his love. I used to think love meant sacrifice. Giving up pieces of yourself to make someone else comfortable. Derek taught me that. But you taught me something different. You taught me that real love sees strength and celebrates it. That real partnership means growing together, not one person shrinking so the other can expand. You taught me something too, he said quietly. That power isn't just about control or fear or dominance. That the strongest people aren't the ones who never break, but the ones who break and choose to rebuild anyway. They stood there as soul glittered below them. 2 people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances and built something neither could have created alone. Not a fairy tale but something better. A partnership forged in honesty, strengthened by respect and sustained by choice. Somewhere in Chicago, Derek Holt was living with the consequences of his cruelty, haunted by the woman he'd tried to destroy. But Zoraya Cole wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about the 12 new women moving into the Rise project next week. About the foundation's expansion plans. About the life she'd built from ashes and determination and the stubborn refusal to stay down. She was thinking about the future, not the past. Because that's what survivors do. They rise. They rebuild. They transform their pain into purpose and their scars into strength. Derek had seen a powerless woman and assumed she'd stay that way. He'd looked at her circumstances and mistaken them for her character. He'd seen her survival and called it weakness. He never bothered to look deeper. Never saw the steel beneath the softness, the fire beneath the fear, the absolute refusal to let cruelty have the final word. That was his mistake. Not hitting her in the mall, though that was catastrophic. Not stealing from her years ago, though that was cruel. His real mistake was assuming that poverty meant powerlessness, that suffering meant surrender, that being broken meant staying broken. Zoraya Cole had never been weak. She'd been forging herself into something unbreakable, one impossible day at a time. Derek Holt just never bothered to look. And by the time he finally did, standing in that mall security office with his world crumbling around him, it was far too late. She'd already won. Not through revenge but through rising. Not through destruction but through creation. Not by becoming hard but by becoming whole. The slap that echoed through the Cheongdam luxury mall had been meant to humiliate her, to remind her of her place, to assert dominance over a woman Derek still thought was beneath him. Instead, it became the catalyst for her greatest triumph. The moment her two worlds collided and she realized she didn't have to choose between them. She could be both the survivor and the success, both the woman who'd slept in her car and the woman who ran a foundation, both scarred and strong. Below them, Seoul glowed eternal and beautiful. Above them, stars fought through light pollution to shine anyway. And Zariah Cole, survivor, wife, founder, woman who'd risen from absolute devastation to build something that would outlast her, smiled. She'd won. Not because Derek had lost, though he had. But because she'd refused to let his cruelty write the ending of her story. She'd written it herself.